I want to run through a few objections that we often hear from atheists. The first being that God is nothing more than a malevolent bully. He allows us to suffer, he punishes us. You would say what to that?
Excuse me, this is actually the toughest argument to answer. This is one that's been around a long time. They didn't think this one up. The existence of evil in the world, the existence of suffering, if we were to look at our human lives and say this is all there is, the atheist would be right. There is no final justice in this world. And we see that good people suffer. We see that bad people, this is a problem in the Old Testament. They write about this. Their bodies sleek and sound. They seem to breed success, and the believers don't. But if we look at it from the perspective of eternity, from God's perspective, then we can realize that there is an eternal justice, that suffering is rewarded. The suffering on this earth will be more than compensated with the joys of heaven. And that it's just a blip. It's a blip in eternity to think of what our lives are here on earth. Let's talk for a moment about the second objection. Jesus is not a historical figure, they say. These are just a collection of old stories Raymond, I'll tell you,
written down 300 years after the man died.
When I was reading some of these books and thinking, I'm going to have to answer this objection, I was embarrassed and ashamed. The arguments are so silly sometimes that you're almost embarrassed to even treat them. This one, saying that Jesus didn't even exist. Again, Dawkins and Hitchens both made this assertion. I mean, it's true that we don't know empirically that George Washington existed, or that Abraham Lincoln, or that Socrates. We have a lot of historical evidence, and we have to weigh the facts and say, did he or didn't he? But the case of Jesus is overwhelming. We have Christian authors, we have Jewish authors, we have Roman historians, we have plethora of authors writing about the existence of Jesus Christ. And to doubt that is like doubting Demosthenes, doubting Julius Caesar. I mean, if you want to do it, you can do it. But is that really the historical record? No, it's not.
And then you have the long trail of men and women who gave their lives and established markers in history that attest. I mean, you can go, that's
and
the
you know,
beauty,
we don't have, the other thing is what we don't have is people, you know, in 150, 170 standing up and saying, hey, this Jesus never existed. I've been there, I know the family, it's all a hoax.
Right.
Not a single scrap of that.
Yeah. What about the argument that the four Gospels contradict each other? They're not historical texts. They're unreliable.
Again, this is re-microwaved old arguments. This is a late 19th century argument that they rehash and try to make sound new by repackaging it. The fact of the matter is that, as many historians have shown, the contradictions between the Gospels actually add to their authenticity. The fact that they don't coincide exactly as if they were written on a template model and, you know, checking each other's facts to make sure they're in agreement is actually a good sign that they are the true thing. And they're actually the best historical record that we have about the life of Jesus. There is no other parallel account that gives us, and what they call the Gnostic Gospels that were written 200-300 years later, it's like, you know, me writing about the Civil War now and saying this is a first-hand account. It just doesn't stand the test of history.
The other thing you often hear is that Jesus was a true person, but he was like something out of a Grisoni book. He was a kind of wayfarer running around making people feel good. He never intended to start a church or impose rules. He was just about getting along and loving everybody.
Yeah, well, people like that, obviously, you know, that'll work in an audience that has never read the Bible. Once you read the four Gospels and you get a sense of Jesus' mission, the way he gathers 12 around himself, the way he separates them from the rest of his disciples and gives them a special mission and kind of consecrates them that mission. He sends them out as missionaries. That immediately after the death of Judas, what do? They appoint a successor. There was an institutional church right from the very beginning. And Paul talks more than 50 times in his letters about the church that Jesus meant, the bride of Christ, the body of Christ. Jesus himself says to Peter, you are rock, and upon this rock I will build my church. He doesn't say, I will, you know, fellowship with you through history and we will just be two ships. No, he says, I will build my church. You know, so anybody open to those facts, you know, sees that that's hogwash.
Pretty clear. And the last argument you raise in the book is this. Well, it's not the last argument in the book, but it's the last one in this one section. It was really, I thought, quite direct. Religious faith causes sexual repression, causes people to be disfigured in their normal appetites, and that, you know, these are things implanted by nature here that the church is suppressing. You would say what to that?
Well, what about the big Catholic families? And we're the ones having all the children. There's something going wrong here. If that's the message, then it's not getting through to our people. I think there's something. And there's another problem. And you read the Bible, and what is the very first commandment God gives in Genesis? Be fruitful, multiply, And he wasn't talking about cloning. He was not. We're going to talk about this later on the show.
And he wasn't talking to the trees.
And he wasn't talking to trees. Be fruitful and multiply. He was saying, this is my creation. This is good. Do this. But do it in the proper way. Do it in a loving relationship. What the church insists on is not to have sex, but sex within marriage, sex within a loving, committed relationship, sex with its openness to children. It's do it, but do it the right way.
The holiness, and it almost becomes a sacrament within the marriage. It is a sacrament within the marriage. Right. Let's raise this other issue. We hear this often. The atheist set has kind of pitted people of faith against scientific inquiry and discovery.
That's exactly
and
right.
we hear this every day, whether it's the Genome Project or stem cell research. You people are just trying to stop the advance of history and the progress of science. What are you afraid of?
Right, and that is a lot of hogwash too. Really, the father of modern genetics, Gregor Mendel, Catholic priest. Catholic priest. We have to remind people of this. This is a Catholic priest. The leader of the Human Genome Project is a Christian, Francis Collins, a believing Christian. The fact of the matter is that the church has always pushed scientific investigation, patronized scientific investigation, and sponsored it the way it did the arts and the way it did all sorts of other cultural movements. And we see that still today. The only thing is that a scientist who says we don't want any sort of ethical boundaries whatsoever, of course the church is going to raise its voice and say, you have to.
A wonderful segue, Father Tom. It's like you wrote this. Father Thomas Williams' book, Greater Than You Think, is available everywhere. He'll join us later to answer your questions, so get those in. When we return, pharmaceutical giant Pfizer is investing in adult stem cell therapy. Why not the more widely touted embryonic stem cell variety? Father Tad Paholchik will be here when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.